So we are progressing with our Bible study now and we are now moving on to the book of Hosea. So in this series so far we have seen uh, the general background to the prophetic movement so that I don't have to go back every time referring back to the kings and other names or dates and things like that. And so we did the book of Amos, and now we are looking at the book of Hosea. And Hosea, as I have already introduced him, he's an 8th century BC prophet. That there were 4 prophets in the 8th century. One is Isaiah, and other is Amos and Micah, and then Hosea. And we also saw that Hosea and Amos, they ministered in the northern kingdom, northern Israel. And both of them were sort of contemporaries also. And the other prophets like Isaiah and Micah, they prophesied in the southern kingdom, in Judah. But Hosea is the only prophet in the northern kingdom who came from northern kingdom, who belonged to the northern kingdom. The other prophet, Amos, he was a southerner. He came from Judah and he prophesied in northern Israel. But Hosea is from northern Israel and he ministered in northern Israel. So the editor introduces him in the first verse itself. Like almost all prophetic books start with an introduction where the final editor has given a title. That's what we find in chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So it very clearly identifies the prophet. Usually they mention the prophets by their father's name. That's a way of trying to specify the person, because there may be many Hoseas, and we know that there was the last king of Israel was called Hoshea. But in pronunciation or writing, probably that can be confused with. There is not much difference between Hosea and Hoshea. So that is the name, the reason why the name of his father is mentioned. Otherwise, there is no other significance. And his date is mentioned as. See, it's a little bit curious why his period, the time in which he ministered, is referred. The references are the names of the kings of the southern kingdom and also one king of the northern kingdom, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, who are the kings of Judah. And this will almost make him contemporary to prophet Isaiah ben Amos, because Amos started the ministry in Uzziah's time, and he ministered almost till the end of Hezekiah's time. So he was a contemporary to, or their ministry of Isaiah, Amos, and Hosea must have overlapped. And Jeroboam is the son of Joash, and he is not the son of Jeroboam, the one who divided the kingdom, or the first king of northern Israel. This is Jeroboam II, who is from a different dynasty, actually the dynasty of Jehu, if you know the history of Israel. So as I already said, that he is a northern Israel prophet in the northern Israel, the only prophet who came from northern Israel. But Amos ministered, but as a southerner. And it's something, when we proceed with the study, we'll notice one very strange thing, that though this book is set in the context of the northern Israel, here and there, sometimes judgments and hope of Judah is also comes in. There are various explanations for this. phenomena, why the northern Israel prophecy primarily addressed to northern Israel should have prophecies for and against Judah as well. One reason is that the book was taken to southern kingdom when Samaria fell, and probably the people in Judah might have re-edited it. That is possible. But another possibility is that probably Hosea was exiled when he prophesied in the days of Jeroboam. The opposition that Amos had to face. So similarly, the opposition, he also probably had opposition, and during the days of Jeroboam, or towards the end of that, he probably had to run away, or he was exiled to Judah, where he continued his prophetic ministry. So that seems to be a much more acceptable proposition. A third possibility is, which is highly possible, is that he must have, when he uttered the inspired oracles, now that included God's message to Judah as well. And we have seen that in the case of Amos also. Amos also has a vision of the reunion of the northern and southern Israel, southern kingdom, that is Judah, and then a messianic age of blessing coming for them. That is the prophetic future, the future of blessedness that they saw. And I already mentioned that he prophesied during the days of Hosea, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, which means that he must have started his ministry from 740, around 740. We are not sure. Say 745 is possible. And he was active during the 41 long years of ministry. Sorry, the rule of Jeroboam II, the Jeroboam son of Joash. He was one of the longest reigning kings. I think some estimate is that he might have reigned 41 years, Jeroboam. So he was there, part of those years. Doesn't take it to mean that Hosea ministered 41 years. During the 41 years and during the days, the period between Uzziah and Hezekiah, he has ministered. That's all that we can say. There is no other way of dating, and dating is more clearer than that is not helpful. We don't need that to understand the message. The book of Hosea falls into two parts, two unequal parts. Usually those who study the book of Hosea take the first part, consider first part as chapters 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. And then we have the chapters 4 to 14. Chapters 4 to 14 forming the second part of short oracles. Very short oracles. But in which order are they coming? What is the relationship between the two? Logical flow from one oracle to the other is very difficult to determine. But the oracles on independently, they probably can take them to group them together, but you can take them independently as well, are very rich. Very, very rich. The book of Hosea is also an amazing book, something that you can read and enjoy for various reasons. The first reason is that its literary style. Hosea looks like a prophet, a poet. He used very vivid metaphors. He is very clever in drawing pictures with words. Very, what you can say, evocative, pictures. So we will see that when we come to that part, the little oracles as well. And another feature of the book of Hosea is it's a book of hope. It's very different from the book of Amos. When I concluded the study of Amos last week, I said it seems that Amos was not giving any hope, or he was not calling people to repentance. He says, your stubborn, sinful, wicked ways, God is going to judge you. Except in the last chapter, chapter 9, where we see a hope in the Messiah. Even that, part of that chapter 9 in Amos, the first part is definitely judgment. So Amos is a book of judgment, except that last 4 or 5 verses in the 9th chapter. But here, Hosea, if you read Hosea once, which you might have done, I hope, you will see here there's a lot of hope in this. It's not just judgment. And even though there is judgment uttered, it is only punishment or a discipline. It's only a discipline. It is not a utter devastation. It is basically something to purify them, bring them back to God. So we can say the book of Hosea is a book of hope. Though there are words of judgment in it, the overall tone, the overarching tone will be, or the dominant tone will be of hope. Now, another important feature of the book of Hosea is that there is a meta-narrative. Everything is built into a meta-narrative. What do I mean by meta-narrative? A meta-narrative is an overarching story, a story which controls all other stories. In that sense, the meta-narrative in the book of Hosea is the theme of marriage. Marriage, divorce or rejection, taking back or acceptance back, blessing, love, and you can say jealousy and all that. So it's all built around the marriage, the marriage of Hosea and Gomer, which is a parable. Now, this is another issue that I hope to deal with later. That is did it really happen, or is it just a parable, an imaginary story that happened? Anyway, the meta narrative takes God as a loving husband. In the book of Amos, we saw the dominant figure of of God is a roaring lion. But here, there is no lion here. The lion is not roaring here. He is not frightening people here. He is not going to tear people away. But he is a loving husband. God is a loving husband. And the people are unchaste, unfaithful wife. So the story is built around, the whole prophetic, this book is built around that overarching thing. So he uses the metaphor which might have really happened in the life of Hosea. Probably it was the real life of Hosea. The metaphor of marriage to bring out the different aspects of relationship with God and his people. Another important feature we will see is, and also it poses a difficulty, that is this is a mixture, or I would rather say, when you read the book, you will see a alternation between punishment and kindness, God's anger and God's mercy. In one verse, we read God uttering something in harsh words. Then in the next verse, you will see God trying to be merciful and kind and loving. So you can see a tension in this book. People have tried psychological analysis on this book, and very fruitful insights have been brought out. See, the struggle a husband goes through when his wife walks away from him, behaves unfaithfully, and restoring that marriage, and they come together again, and all that tension, so that you can see in the oracles themselves, in the prophetic books, every passage. And that is why teaching this book is very difficult, and learning it is even more difficult, because you see these two poles the two different polarities intermixed. Okay, with that we should move on to the study of the book now. So what I'd like to achieve today is just to look at the first part of the book of Hosea, that is introduction, chapters 1, 2 and 3, the first three chapters. And then I will also divide them into smaller parts for us to handle it a little more easily. The first part of that is what I would like to pick up is chapter 1 verses 2 to chapter 2 verse 1. This is the story of Hosea and his wife Gomer. And as I said, the whole prophecy is built around this meta-narrative or the overarching story. Now, we'll see, let me read verses 2 onwards. When the Lord spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take to yourself a wife of whoredom, and take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom for forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now, this presents 100 problems for interpretation. First, various problems. Number one problem is, how can God ask a prophet? A prophet is a man of God, isn't it? How can God ask a prophet to marry a prostitute, a woman of whoredom? Is this factual? Did this really happen? Or this is fictional, a parabolic thing, that it is simply a parable? Or there is another possibility also. Is this an acted parable? That is, God asked him to do what he has to do, what he had asked him to do. Hosea has to do that. And that life of Hosea, this horrible life of Hosea, became a parable. We are not sure, because we can only say that this actually is a shocking event. And through this prophet, God speaks, uses the life, the broken marriage of a prophet who has committed his life to speak on behalf of God. A horrible, broken, fragile marriage, which actually, now there is a debate whether Gomer was a prostitute, a woman of whoredom before marriage, or did she turn into whoredom after marriage. Let's put that debate aside. Whichever way, whether she was a prostitute at the time of marriage, or did she leave Hosea and marry or go after other lovers later, is a different story. But this is, I believe that this is a true story, because in the rest of the case of other prophets like Jeremiah and also Isaiah and Ezekiel, and we can think of at least 3 or 4 prophets where their personal lives have become a means, a medium for God to speak to God's people. Ezekiel, for example, God told him, your wife will die, but you are not allowed to cry. You should not lament for her. Jeremiah had various struggles. We will see one by one later. And in a similar manner, Isaiah had much more honorable ways of giving names to his children and having children to carry the message of God and all that. Anyway, so probably this is a parable, a life. That's what I would like to, if you ask me my personal opinion, I would say Hosea had to surrender his life, his marriage, so that through that broken marriage, unfaithful wife, and sometimes illegitimate children, children born out of the marriage, his marriage with Gomer, God had a powerful message for the people. Let me also point out some other possibility as well. The word used for whoredom here is also used metaphorically for idolatry. So, if you want to be a little more kind and sympathetic to Gomer and Hosea in your interpretation and understanding of the passage, you can also consider this possibility. That is, this symbolizes the idolatry of Gomer. Gomer, who is an idol worshipper, who represents other women and men in Israel who has gone after the fertility cults, idolatry, or worshipping Baals and Asherahs and all that. So it may not be a matter that involves sex. It may be a matter of religious apostasy as well. That is we trying to be very kind to Hosea and Gomer. But let's leave that. As I already said, I think, and I have reasons to think, which will be clear when we proceed with the studies, that this is something which was real, that Hosea had to marry a woman who was unfaithful or who had other lovers before or after, certainly after the marriage, and God used that life, the broken life of Hosea, to show or tell the people the unfaithfulness of the people, but still the love that won't let me go of the Lord for his people. Though they are, he pursues them and he lures them back. That's the story. Okay. But before we go into the details, now what happened in the marriage is that Hosea had 3 children in the marriage. That is what chapters 1, 2, verse 2 to chapter 2, verse 1 talks about. Now, the first son, verse 4, says he had a son. So, in that marriage, in verse 4, God said to him, call his name Jezreel. So all the 3 children are given symbolic names, like the children of Isaiah the prophet as well. And the Lord said, call his name Jezreel. For, that's very important, because God is giving the reason why this boy, the first child, should carry or have that name Jezreel. For in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow in Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Jezreel is a valley, if you know the geography of Canaan, between south of Galilee and north of Samaria. I mean, the valley between that. And it is a place of a lot of wars. And even people who believe dispensationalism believe that the last battle, the Armageddon, will be fought somewhere in that area. So that is why we have that name Armageddon as well. We'll come to that maybe later. So Jezreel is the first, and the reason why he should call, God says, look, you have to call him for Jezreel for various reasons. Now, the number one reason he says is that this child is a reminder. This child is a reminder that God is going to put an end to Jezreel, to the end to northern Israel. The reigning monarch, Jeroboam, is the grandson of Jehu. Jehu led revolt against the Omrites, the son of Ahab. He killed them. There is a lot of bloodshed. You can read about that in the book of Kings. Then what happens is that he says, look, this is a reminder that I am going to put an end to this dynasty. I'm going to, so that is what Jezreel is. Just because you have to know, the Jeroboam need to know that he got the power from the dynasty of Ahab or Omri, because God intervened. In a similar manner, God is going to intervene against you. So that is the meaning of this prophecy. And a second thing he says is that in that same verse, he reminds Jehu's victory, and he says, I'm going to reverse that as well. And if you read, Jezreel Valley was the bread basket of Israel. That is the alluvial sand and the streams running through. It has become a place even now. Even now, if you go to Galilee, you have to pass through Jezreel Valley, and the road leads. There's a very, very fertile land around all that place. Now, the point is, in chapter 2, verse 9, God says, I will withhold your bread and your wine and your oil, because God says that this son reminds the people that God is going to be very serious with them. So that is the significance of Jezreel. And now in verse 6 and 7, we see that a new child was born, and she conceived and again bore a daughter. And then God said to him, call her name No Mercy, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God. And I will not save them by bow or by sword or by war or by horses or horsemen. But I will have, here you see, he says Lo Ruchma, the name Ruchma, the second is a girl. And there is some indication, some scholars would say that this child was not Hosea's daughter. Probably this Gomer had left him, and she had gone away from Hosea. She dishonored the marriage. Probably this child was born in that marriage. So that may be a possibility. Lo Ruhma. And she hasn't given, or she will not receive mercy. It's an indication that is a simple thing. The indication that the people of God will not receive mercy. There are two sides to this reality. Probably the oppressors, people who oppress the people, the rich who oppress the people, the poor people, they show no mercy. Probably that is what this signifies. Or this also may signify that God will have no mercy on the oppressors as well. So we come to the name of the third child now. Okay, the third child is called Lo Ami. That is verses 8 and 9. When she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. So this is a son. The third child is a son. And the daughter said, call his name not my people. You are not my people, and I am not your God. Here is a total denial. God, see, through the broken marriage, God speaks that I have rejected, or people have rejected me. And then he also speaks symbolically through the names of the children. Like he asked prophet Isaiah to do. Maharshalel Hasbaz, and then Shear Yashub, and the names were of the children. So here also, probably it's an indication that this child carries the name and the name which signifies that God has completely given up on them. God has completely given up on his people. Because Gomer left Hosea, or like Gomer leaving Hosea, the people of God who had made a covenant with him, and God takes up the responsibility of a husband who provides for his wife, loves his wife. She failed to return that love to him. Now, as I already said in the introduction, you see, here is the harsh rejection from God, God's wrath. Now, I also want you to imagine something here. Think of living in a housing society or in a gated property or in a town like this. And it's a talk of the town that Hosea's wife has left him. She's living with somebody else now. Or maybe she is a street prostitute in the street, red light street. Now, on the top of it, the children goes to school or public places, and here they say, "Oh, here comes Jezreel." So naturally, people will be curious. What does this mean? Why this child is called Jezreel? Though, so either people who know the story, or who know Hosea, or Hosea himself, or the child, if the child is grown up to enough to talk and explain why he heard this strange name, he will be uttering a prophecy. Verse 4, he said, "Here I am going to end the dynasty of Jehu in this valley." It is in this valley he got the power. The power was transferred from Ahab's son to Jehu, Jeroboam's grandfather. And this is the place where Ahab killed Naboth. You know the story. So, because in this valley Ahab killed Naboth, the man, because he refused to give his parental property, I have put an end to his dynasty in this valley. But I gave the power to Jehu. And now Jehu's grandson, Jeroboam too, has to listen, hear this. Grandson, or his descendant, I should rather say, that should hear this message that in this valley, this is the end of this dynasty. Maybe now Lo Ruhma, the only girl in the family, grows up, and people may ask her, "What's your name?" And she will say, "This is my name." "And why your father gave you this crazy name?" So she may be able, or somebody around them, she will be able to explain that God says he will not pity his people anymore. He has rejected them. And not only pity, the third son's name will tell the public, his family members, his circle, that God has rejected them. Now, as I already said, all these prophecies, there is an alternation. The two poles, two opposites, try to compromise, or they try to make appearance and disappear. Now, the next two verses or three verses in chapter 1, verse 10 to 11 are words of hope. Tremendous hope. See, in verse chapter 1, 10, 11, after these harsh words of rejection, disowning, and punishment to the extent of end of the dynasty, here comes comforting words. Chapter 1, verses 10 to 11. When she had won no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, "Call his name not my people." That is not the verse I was looking for. Let me read from my Bible, 1, 10 to 11, the last verses. "Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people. See, it's in the same chapter. A few verses above, God said, you are not my people. Lo ami. Now he says, where it is said, Lo ami, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. God says, I'm going to reverse the punishment I just uttered. And verse 11, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. So he says, oh, okay, here is the battle in Jezreel or the end of the dynasty, but no. Listen, I'm going to reverse the fortune. But it's not saying, he's not contradicting. He's not actually negating what he said. There are two sides. One side of rejection and punishment, but Hosea, God speaks through Hosea and also says, no, that is not the end of the story, but you have hope. After that punishment is over, I'm going to restore you. Look at this passage. It actually echoes the Abrahamic covenant. In chapter 22 of book of Genesis, verse 17, God had blessed him, Abraham, and said, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemies. That was Genesis 22:17. And that's exactly what he says. The prophet Hosea, God speaks through God Hosea. He says, yet the number of the children shall be like the sand of the sea. So he says, after this rejection is done or disowning happens, I'm going to restore the blessings of the Abrahamic covenant. And he talks about a time of unity. In the verse 11, he says, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. You know the story that happened, that the historical event that happened in 922 BC, almost 150 years ago. That kingdom was divided, painful division of the kingdom into two pieces, warring pieces, hostile pieces of hostile nations. Now they will come together one day. Let's say the last days, he says, they will come together. The people will be united and they will appoint for themselves one head. There will be a ruler for them, and they shall go out from the land, and great shall be the day of Jezreel. Now, he is looking forward to a days of a Messiah, a golden days for the people of God. Now, so that is chapter 1 to 1. That is, what did we see there? The story of his marriage, the symbolic names of the children, which carries the powerful message of Yahweh, that because you have rejected me, God, the people of Israel have rejected me, gone after other gods. See, these are all religious. This is a spiritual and religious connotation. Because you have gone after other gods and idols, you have rejected me, the true husband who loves you, redeemed you, and all that. So this is what is going to happen. There is going to be a horrible battle in Jezreel, which will put an end to Israel, or the Israel will be completely destroyed. Not only in Jezreel, it's a reminder. Jezreel is a reminder. I have no pity for you. I have disowned you. You are no more my people. But at the same time, God says, no, wait a second. Though this is what I have decided, once this is over, this punishment is over, I will reverse the punishment. There will be unity. There will be blessing. The children will be numerous, like I had promised my faithful servant Abraham, and there will be a messianic age of blessing. Now, the tone changes in the next chapter. The whole tone changes. Now, what do we see in chapter 2? Chapter 2, 1 to 13, we see legal proceedings against this unfaithful wife. The unfaithful wife, according to Numbers 5, there are some rituals. It is called the offering of jealousy. An offering of jealousy is when a husband doubts the chastity, the faithfulness of his wife, and when he has no other evidence to prove that she was unfaithful during their marriage, no witness, no evidence, no proof, then Numbers 5 has a ritual. He has to bring, this is called the offering of jealousy. And you can read Numbers 5. We don't have time to describe that or read it here. So the husband brings the wife to the shrine or to the presence of the priest, and they make her take a oath saying of innocence. Either she can admit her unfaithfulness, but if she's so sure about her faithfulness, she can stick to that. But then the priest will take a portion with the with the dust in the sanctuary and mix it with water and make her drink, and then if she is unfaithful, she will swell and she will flop. That is what Numbers 5 says. Because she has drank this little liquid with what do you call, the dust of the sanctuary, floor of the sanctuary. But if nothing happens, she was faithful. So that was the procedure. So, but here God takes them in chapter 2 verses 1 to 3, a trial, the unfaithful wife. See, as I said, this image of Gomer and the people also alternates. Please remember that. Though there is a meta-narrative of Gomer Hosea marriage, unfaithfulness, children born in that marriage, either within wedlock or outside wedlock. Now, so we cannot say where exactly this shifting happens from Gomer to Hosea, Gomer and children to Yahweh and the people of Israel. Anyway, God is not taking them. So now here in this scene, 2, 1 to 3, there is a trial. But who are going to try the unfaithful wife? It's not Hosea. It is not, that test is not going to take place in the sanctuary. But it is the children trying their mother. Chapter 2, verse 2. Plead with your mother. Plead, for she is not my wife. These are the words of God. And I am not her husband, that she may put away her whoring from her face and the adultery from between her breasts. So the children are going to try the wife of Hodam or their mother. And God says very powerfully that I am not. See, this must be the words of Hosea also. And so Hosea represents God, and God speaks through Hosea. So who is the speaker and all that is very difficult to say. Now in verses 2 to 5, I'm thinking of chapter 2, we see the accusations against her. Plead with your mother. And we already read that, the accusation. And then he says, I'm going to chastise her. But again, you can see the conflicts that is going in the mind of a loving husband. He want to disown her. He want to divorce her. But he is loving. You see, God, here in this case, I mean, what we are thinking of God. As I said, where Hosea ends, the image of Hosea, the life of Hosea ends, and the metaphor of God and his people begins, it's very difficult to say. So therefore, here it is God trying or the husband. Let me use the word husband. You can take it as Hosea and also as God. But in this case, it is God. And God, in verses 6 and 7, God is trying to say that though I have rejected, though I have done that, she has gone away after her lovers, I will protect her. That's a tension. Is the conflict, the psychological conflict that this husband goes through. Therefore, I will hedge up her way with thorns and will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. She shall pursue her lovers but will not overtake them, and she shall seek them but they will not find them. Then she will say, I will go and return to my husband, for it was better for me than now. So, could you imagine a wayward wife trying to run away from her husband's home after her lovers, but the husband has made a fence around her? Now, even when if she is able to break the fence, she will not be able to catch up with her lovers. Pursuing, she is running after them, and then she will come back. So God says here, see, I'm like a husband who don't want to leave my wife, though she has this tendency to run after her lovers now and then. I will do all that I can do, like putting a hedge around her and making sure that she cannot catch up with her. And then at that point, this wayward wife will come back. See, now this is another aspect of the loving heart of God the husband. God who loves his people. He tries his level best to make sure that she cannot go after other gods and idols. So here are the symbolisms actually. So the other lovers are the other gods and the other religious cults and festivals and things like that, in which the people of Israel really found a lot of maybe comfort, faith, and hope. Now in verse 2, verse 8, next verse, the accusation begins again. God, the accusation against her. She did not know that it was I who gave her the grain and wine and oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they use for Baal. Now, things are much more clear now. See, though God brought them from the land of Egypt, gave them this land, and protected them, provided them the food, the good harvest, and also the money, gold that they made through trading and all that things, the prosperity. And you should know that this is a period of Amos and Hosea ministered in a period of Israel's prosperous days, the golden years of Israel and Judah. So the people were rich. We saw that in the book of Amos. But what were they doing? They thought that Baal, the fertility god, the god that Canaanites worshipped, is the one who blessed them. So they were taking their grain and wine and their gold and offering to the Baals, the gods, Baals and Asherah and other pagan gods, thinking that the blessings have come from them. But God reminds, look, you ignored me. I am the one who gave you your grain and the wine and the prosperity. But you took the prosperity, instead of giving it to you, honor me, you are honoring Baal, your lover, the adulterous people. That is why idolatry and apostasy, backsliding, going after other gods is pictured, is presented here in this rather uneasy, uncomfortable metaphor of a wife running away from husband after chasing the lovers. Now, in verse chapter 9 to 13, that 5 verses or 6 verses, God talks about the punishment. He says that I will strip you of the punishment is given there. I will strip you of all your luxuries, your fineries. I will withhold your grain and your oil and your wine, which you think, definitely, you think it is from Baal, the Canaanite god. Though you did not recognize me, it is me who gave you this. A loving husband, according to the law, has to provide for the wife. He has to provide her clothing, he has to provide her ornaments, food, wine, and oil. But God says, I'm going to take everything from you, and I'm going to send a famine. And your festivities, they are also the festivals of Baal and Asher and other gods. They were celebrating those festivals and honoring those gods. In these 6 verses, God says, I think it's 5 verses, God says, I'm going to take that festivals also from you. Now, with that utter at the harsh words, but when we come to the next section of the same chapter, the final part of the second chapter, that is chapter 2, verses 14 to 23, we see that God is trying to lure her back. God says, no, she is after the other lovers, which in this sense, in a spiritual sense, are the pagan gods after whom she is going, thinking that this the Baals and the offerings to Baal and idol worship is bringing prosperity. He says, no, still I haven't given up. I am going to bring her back. Chapter 2, verses 14 to 23. Let's look at some verses, significant verses. Chapter 2, verses 14 to 15, we can see a very vivid picture of God trying to bring her back. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. Is probably is a reference to the care that Israel received when they were in wilderness. They were not cultivating anything. They can't hunt anything because it's a wilderness. But God provided for them in their helplessness in the wilderness. 40 years, water, meat, and manna, and their clothes, their sandals, everything God provided. And probably He may take her back to that wilderness or that experience of His tender care. In verse 15 it says, there I will give her her vineyards and make her the valley of Achor a door of hope. The valley of Achor is the place where Achan was killed for his sin. It's a symbol, valley of Achor is a symbol of God's wrath and judgment. But now God promises her, no, the valley of Achor I'll change it into, drastically change it into a door of hope. And there shall be answer and there he shall answer us in the days of her youth, and at the same time when she came out of the land of Egypt. And she says that, or God, I already told you that the book of Hosea is so rich with vivid metaphors and allegories. He is a master poet. So here God says that, you remember those days when I cared for Israel, in the wilderness 40 years. Similarly, I will replay the whole experience again. And I hope, he expresses his hope. And he says, and remove the name of the Baals, for I will remove the name of the Baals from her mouth and shall be remembered no more. And he says that he will remove the name of Baal, and she will not call her husband anymore Baal. Baal also means, in a sense, master, and though it's the name of God. So God is going to change the very way she will speak as well. Then he says in the next verse, Again, the whole hope of the messianic age comes. The next verse, he says, look, it is more than that wilderness journey. And verse 18 talks about a blessing which will not be historically possible, but possible to God in His own time, the end days. Verse 18, let me read that. And I'll make for them a covenant on that day when I have taken her back to the wilderness experience and remind her of the love and the care they received as a people of God in the wilderness, and that day with beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the creeping things of the ground, and I abolish the bow, the sword, and war from the land. I'll make you lie down in safety. Here is the return of paradise. Now he is promising that when I will lure her back, I will bring her back to the relationship, the unfaithful wife. There, she is going to live in an ideal place where the beasts, the birds of heaven, and the creeping things of the ground will all be blessed. There will be peace. There will be no hunting in that place. There will be no sword. There will be no violence in that place. There will be no war in that place. And she will dwell in safety. Now, other prophets also had similar visions. See, if you read the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, for example, it talks about a time when there will be peace and they will turn their swords into plowshares. And in Isaiah chapter 11, talks about a child will play in the hole of the adler. The leopard will lie with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and the child will lead them. A time when the Messiah comes, rules. So here, the God is not giving up the people, the sinful people. He is promising them. There is an effort from God's side. God is taking an effort so that they will not run away much again and again. And she had trying to urge her in. And then he is going to bless her and is offering them a messianic future. And then the last verses 21 and 22 and 23, he says everything is going to be reversed. As we already saw, I said this, the themes appear again and again and again repeatedly. And chapter 2 verses 21 says, and in that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth, and the earth shall answer the grain and wine and oil, and they shall answer Jezreel. I already told you, Jezreel is the bread basket of Israel. And I will sow her with myself in the land, and I'll have mercy on no mercy. Lo Ruhma, the second child. And I will say to my people, you are my people. You remember the name of the third child, Lo Ami. And you shall say, he shall say, you are my God. God says, look, all these things are over, but I have compassion for you. I will take you back. God says everything will be fine. You can see the tension, the conflict, the psychological conflict that goes on in the heart of God. And we come to the final piece that I promised that I will do. That is chapter 3 verses 1 to 5. Here we have a section where the redemption, God says, I'm going to redeem you. But not only this, not just God saying. Now, just as God asked Hosea to marry this woman of whoredom, now God tells him to go and buy her back. In chapter 3 verse 1, we read that, and the Lord said to me, this is Hosea speaking, go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel. Though they run to other gods and love cakes of raisins. Here is the command of God to marry Gomer again. It's not very clear whether Hosea is asked to marry the same person because her name is not mentioned here, or another woman. But all possibilities, it must be this same woman, and that is Gomer. But look at how he's not just going to invite her back home. He's not saying come home. He's not saying that. But he has to buy her. To buy. So I bought, verse 2 says, God said, go and buy her back. So verse 2, Hosea says, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethech of barley. So, which indicates that Gomer is sold into slavery by now. There's an indication. But there are some problems also here. That the price is 15 shekels. He is giving 15 shekels and some barley. But according to Exodus chapter 21:32, the price of a bonded slave is 30 shekels. Now that is what the law says, the price shall be 30 shekels. But now she is bought for the half price. What does that mean? That means many things. One, the first thing, the most ordinarily possible is that the price of the bonded slaves have come down, or that was only the law, but in practice in the 8th century it was only 15 shekels. One argument. A second argument is that the first thing is that she had to be bought, because that means she is in bondage. The 15 shekels simply mean that she probably has become so cheap, a cheap commodity, which even her owners or lovers, in this case we can even imagine the managers or the people who owns the red light business, they are trying to get rid of her for whatever price they can. We are not able to decide on this. Okay, so the point here is that Gomer is in a situation where she had to be purchased for a price. That means she has to be redeemed from bondage. She cannot just come back even when she wants to come back. So that is what Hosea does. Then the metaphor shifts now from Gomer to the people of Israel. And I said to her, because the application is actually for the people of Israel, verse 3, chapter 3, verse 3 and 4. You must dwell as mine for days. You shall not play the whore, for belong to another man. So will I also be to you. God, in the person of Hosea, promises his faithfulness to her, covenant. For the children of Israel shall dwell many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or household gods. Now, here is a period, here in this, there's a period of purification. Now, the chastisement has happened. Now, there's a period of purification. We are not sure, but it seems that this passage is talking about an exile, that people going into an exile, where they will have no ruler, they'll be away from their temple and shrines, there will be no worship, and they will also not have the ephod to know the will of God. Or ephod by now might have become a something for doing some magical things. Whatever it is, she has to spend a period of purification without all this. But not forever. Not forever. And verse 5, the last verse of this section, says, after this period when they have no ruler, when there is no worship. Now, this all happened in exile, almost 70 years of exile. Afterwards, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord. They will seek the Lord, their God, and David, their king, and they shall come in fear to the Lord and to the goodness of the latter days. So, Hosea, this section ends with a hope. Now, this message had already come. I told you earlier. Now, this place where they will come back to the son of David, the one who is born in the family of David, who will establish a rule, a messianic age. So, that is the metaphor, the overarching metaphor, meta-narrative of the book of Hosea. Scholars say that Hosea has two introductions. One is chapter 1, verse 1, where we see the title, where the book introduces the prophet, the days of the prophet, and all that. And the second introduction is this chapter, this section, that is the marriage of Hosea and Gomer, and how it broke, how God/Hosea brings her back, and how God reconciles, promises his faithfulness, and reverses their fortunes and offers them a Messiah. And then rest of the prophecy is completely, what you can say, subsumed in this shell, or this covering, this overarching story, the rest of the prophecy, that is chapter 4 to 14. So here we see many things. How God loves his people. His love is compared here to the love of a husband to his wife. Here we see the prefiguring of Christ, who loved his church, his bride, and gave himself for her. God, Christ, who adorns her, purifies her with the waters of baptism, adorns her with righteousness. But though not the ideal church, but the people who claim to belong to church or the body of Christ may go apostate, may be backsliding. They may not love God as much as God loved them. But here is the loving husband, the bridegroom, who will always be willing to accept, provided, and protect, also protecting them and purifying them and preparing them for a great day of the messianic rule. That's how the book of Hosea, the first part, ends. A lot of things to thank God for, praise God for, and I believe that in various ways this has deepened our faith in the Lord, in God who is faithful, though we remain unfaithful. And that's what I would take away from this study today. May God's name be blessed. And until we come back with the rest of the book of Hosea, part 2, in the next week. May God bless you. Amen.